Welcome to Fishing Without Bait, a lifetime without definitive expectations. If you found us by accident or on purpose, you're welcome here. What we're doing is to help people not find themselves, we're helping people to create themselves, to participate in their life through full impact mindfulness. There's no entrance requirements, only the honesty, open mindedness, and willingness to try. And if you have a few pixie dust sprinkles of each one of those, you're on your way. Welcome aboard. My name's Jim Ellermeyer. I'm a behavioral health therapist. And as for loyal listeners of this program, you know that we like to have an eclectic roster of guests. And tonight we're joined by Jenni Crumpton Ross. So, Jenni, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama, in a very strict religious milieu. My upbringing was very much ensconced in a certain brand of Christianity. And it was something that I found to be difficult to function within as I grew up. I left Alabama in 2003. When I was 30 years old, I shamed my whole family by getting a divorce and picking up and leaving for New York City. And it was the best decision I ever made on many levels. Um, and in New York, that's where I really grew up. I learned things that had been sort of hidden from me in my education and my upbringing. I got exposed to new ideas and exposed to a language of faith and spirituality that I had always suspected was out there, but had always been something out of my reach. And so along the way, I had a career in advertising and in the corporate world for about 12 years. And then I decided I was going to leave the corporate world and go to seminary at Union Theological Seminary, which is at Columbia University in New York. And I studied interfaith social justice and cross studied political science at Columbia. And I married those two into this idea that our faith and our spirituality and our development of ourselves, our self realization, should be primarily looked at in a framework of justice and equality and wholeness. And what I interestingly realized was that was the real story of the gospel that had been very much twisted in my upbringing. Freedom, not being held in chains. And so after seminary, I went into the nonprofit world and started to work for organizations that were looking to free people who were living in marginalized circumstances, doing work to actually utilize the tenets of faith, whatever faith that is, to argue for freedom and equality and wholeness for all human beings. And that started to really sit right with my soul that I was in the right place. I stumbled into yoga and mindfulness, meditation several years back. Mind you, I had been told growing up that yoga would land me in hell. However, I found it to be extremely heavenly. And in my own journey, I was diagnosed with complex PTSD in 2012, thereabouts. And this was much, I believe, a product of not just my upbringing, but several experiences that I had had of abuse and violence. And it was so great to finally realize that it wasn't just that something was wrong with me, but that I had been deeply impacted and affected by things that I had experienced. And everything started to make a little more sense, even though everything was so mysterious and seemed so out of whack to get a diagnosis like that. And yet, that was the moment that everything began to sort of fall into place along a trajectory of the universe in my journey. And over the course of time, I started to realize that I could use yoga and mindfulness in my healing process. Um, and that wasn't originally something I read in a book. It was something that I experienced firsthand, physically, mentally, spiritually. And I think one of the first things that happened to me was being in yoga class. And in the end, in Shavasana, and having tears just stream down my face. And I realized, that there was something about this physical activity and the combination of awareness and breath and movement that loosened up a lot of the emotions that were stuck inside of me, and loosened up a lot of the experiences and memories that were lodged inside of me and causing physical symptoms. So I would notice when I did hip opener postures in a class, I would start to have memories of things from my childhood. And this progressed. I decided to, when COVID hit, it was all, the one blessing out of that was that yoga teacher training was online. I had a 3-year-old at the time. So at night, I would do my yoga teacher training online. And I did my 200-hour and my 300-hour, and I learned, so much about mindfulness in that process. Um, and I just had so many uncanny experiences during those months of teacher training that taught me so much more than what, so much more than what the training was really about. In that process, I met the folks at Kula for Karma and realized that they were harnessing this in a way that helped people with trauma, addiction, and mental health conditions. And I got to do a practicum with them and develop a workshop, and it was just so intriguing. And so I never lost contact with the folks at Kula, even as I was doing a lot of consulting work. And lo and behold, a few months later, Kula had a position open up, and I was able to walk in and become a part of the Kula team, um, utilizing yoga and mindfulness, meditation, and breathing techniques to serve people, particularly in marginalized and underserved communities, with these tools. And so it felt like life had really come full circle, and I had sort of landed where I was supposed to be.
So, could you tell us a little bit more about the kitchen you were cooked in down in Alabama and the spices that were added to you?
Yes, they left quite a taste in my mouth. Um, so I was raised, and not to critique or criticize any religious beliefs, but my experience was that I was raised in the Southern Baptist Church in the evangelical world. And I actually wrote a book about it that was published in 2015 after I graduated from seminary. I felt like I had had so many aha moments, and I wanted to write a book for girls who grew up like me, who were looking to find their way into some type of self agency and self confidence after being sort of cooked in that kitchen. So, there's many types of evangelicalism. There's, many types of Christianity. The brand in my household and my immediate community was um, not good for girls. It was very limiting, quite oppressive. And God was definitely shaped into this man who controlled everything and a lot of, onus for purity on girls, and but yet not having faith and belief in girls, or believing their experiences. So I struggled a lot growing up, but just wanted to make people happy. Wanted to be a good girl. And I think so many young ladies, and I'd love to know about some of the young ladies you've worked with in this journey to confidence and self realization and agency. Um, and so I knew at some point that I was going to have to break out of um, that community in order to find who I really was and why I was on this earth and what I had come here to do, and to find out the truth that obviously Birmingham, Alabama, where I'm from, has quite a terrible history. And so, along the lines of being in this bubble of sexism that was made to seem like chivalry, I was also growing up alongside this terrible history of racism, and coming to find out in my 20s that my public school education had really left out a lot of information, a lot of stories, and that history had really been rewritten, and I was missing so many parts of the whole story of reality, and that's embarrassing. That's really embarrassing when you come to a point in your 20s where you discover how ignorant you are, um, not only to the plight of different people and groups of people and communities around you, but also to um, your own, the female sex. I had really, been raised in a way where I initially didn't ask very many questions. And so there came this point where, by the grace of God, I like to say, I was kind of the one who was always the black sheep, and I became the one who started to voice questions and dissent and dissatisfaction with all the answers that had always been fed to me. And so it's tough when you have to break away from your family unit and the security of that and the comfort of that in order to become the person that you, you know, is really the DNA of your soul that's just waiting to expand. So, but it was worth it.
It most certainly was. Generally, what the women that I deal with, you were asking about that, deal with a lot of guilt and shame. A
Mm.
lot of it is based on their religious upbringing and what they should do and what they shouldn't do. And then there's some anger thrown in there, Jenny. Now, the anger is overshadowed then by guilt and shame because they shouldn't be feeling angry. Uh, and so self-concept, that's, you know, this, it's facts and information you know about yourself. Self-esteem is how you interpret those facts and information, which is skewed based on how you were raised and the atmosphere that you were raised in, who modeled behavior for you and who put that fear into you. So Jesus's message was based on love, compassion, and forgiveness. That's all he talked about. And we did a podcast not too terribly long ago called Jesus the Socialist, where I think we offended some people by explaining that Jesus was the architect of socialism.
Yes, he was all about justice, equality, raising people up. The first, the people who are assumed to be the first in society will be last, and the last will be first. Yeah, Jesus was a really amazing person, and
He was a cool dude.
definitely an ascended master we're talking about here. And
very,
um,
very much so.
But, I always say he never said, worship me. He always said, follow me, follow me, follow me. And it's sad to watch people who worship Jesus not follow Jesus. Um, so that's always, that's a good bit about what my book, Femme Evangelical, is about.
Ah,
Is really helping young women in particular to see how the religion got twisted over the years, that Jesus actually didn't found Christianity. Jesus was a Palestinian Jew, and and sort of educating young women on how religions take shape and how the tenets get formed and whose voices are entering into it, and the patriarchal overtones of the time, and how that all works together to create something that today makes us feel guilt and shame when and makes us become small and contracted instead of expanding.
Jesus did not start a religion. He started a movement.
Mhm.
So the whole idea of
Yeah.
that, what I ask people, and we could spend the rest 2 or 3 hours talking about the gospel writers and how they were formed and what type of message they were sending. But however, sometimes I'll just ask people when they talk about the subservience of women. I said, who was with Jesus at the crucifixion? It was his mother, Mary Magdalene, and John. And I said, who found the tomb? Who found the tomb empty? It was Mary Magdalene and a few other women. That's who
Right,
found the tomb. And of course, the apostles didn't believe them.
right.
Uh, so,
And it's
uh,
so interesting to learn how the texts got redacted later, and even some of the councils, that were formed in the early church, and how they decided to leave certain parts out and, "Oh, include this, but don't include that," and, Mary's, writing in to ruin Mary's reputation, claiming that she was a prostitute and things like that.
it was a ninth century pope that declared that she was a prostitute.
Yeah, yep, you're right.
So the cause of the Gospels were originally written in Greek, and
Mm,
they were written mainly in Rome. And of course, there wasn't anybody named Matthew or John or those people. They didn't name them like that. And I think people forget that Jesus was a practicing Jew.
mhm,
Uh, the Last Supper was a celebration of Passover,
mhm,
was what it was. And Jesus was a Jew until he died. And, it wasn't the Jewish people who crucified him, it was the Romans who
mhm.
crucified him. They talk about Pontius Pilate, and actually, John wrote this, the Gospel of John wrote this apology for the Romans because Christians were being crucified at the time. So he wrote all these things about Pontius Pilate. And washed the blood of an innocent man. It's upon you. That stuff never happened. Pontius Pilate, as brutal as the Romans were, Jenny, and they were brutal. Pontius Pilate was recalled to back to Rome because of his brutality.
Right, yeah. And there's so many conflicting stories even within the gospel, but certainly within the Bible, about the different accounts and who did what, and, within the same book, you can read 2 completely different contradictory accounts of
all
something.
all of the gospels have different views. Mark is the oldest gospel. So, and actually, what we're getting off the topic just a little bit, but actually, Mark's gospel ended at when Mary Magdalene found the tomb empty. At,
Mhm.
at years and years later, there were 7 paragraphs added to that so they could coincide with the rest of the gospels and the message that they wanted to send.
I love that you know all this. Did you go to seminary too?
No, but I've done a lot of research because it just irritates me that Jesus' message of love, compassion, and forgiveness is and what I tell people. As I said, Jesus' message was love, compassion, and forgiveness. And if that's not part of your ideology or the way that you behave, the way that you look at things, then you might want to re-examine your faith basis.
And, I think it's such a worthy discussion too, because for so many people, religion or faith traditions are a big hit to our mental health. And, it's probably just one of the leading causes, if you really drill down into it, for people having, a host of different mental health conditions and challenges, is that kind of infiltration of those messages.
There's two words that mean the most to me, and that's action and effort. I speak at a lot of rehabs, and I'll ask them about, do they believe in God? And almost all of them say, no, I couldn't tell you. I couldn't fill a table up with a number of people who were true atheists. A lot of them tried to shock me. But then I'll ask them, I'll say, where did that belief get you? It got you staring me in the eyeballs. And then we move from belief to faith. And all faith is belief in something that you don't understand. But then we move from faith to faith in action. And I always tell this story, Jenny. I said, there was a person who prayed to win the lottery every day. Sweat blood. Well, nothing ever happened. So they got so angry that they yelled up to the sky. They said, God, why won't you let me win the lottery? And God called back down and said, could you meet me halfway and at least buy a ticket? So, so the whole idea, it's action and effort. What I tell my patients is, I'll do my part. I expect you to do yours. In our next episode, we'll be continuing our conversation with Jenni, and please check out their website, karmaforkula.org. And as our free prescription that you can definitely fill anywhere, fruits, nuts, and vegetables. Unplug your television and take up fishing. And for a truly mindful experience, we suggest you fish without bait. Please do a kindness for yourself and a kindness for another. Forgive yourself and forgive another. Till all are free, none are free. If we're all not God's children, then none of us are. Namaste.
Please check out our website at fishingwithoutbait.com, where you can listen to the show, comment on our discussions, and find out where you can subscribe to our podcast. If you're interested in flying the colors of Fishing Without Bait, click the shop icon on our website. We have clothing, mugs, cell phone cases, and so much more. Show the world that you fish without bait. This show is a member of the Sorgatron Media Podcast Network. Find out more at sorgatronmedia.com.